On April 3, 1860, a thin young man named Johnny Fry mounted his horse and galloped westward with a valuable satchel of correspondence as dawn dawned over St. Joseph, Missouri. This wasn't just another mail delivery. It was the inaugural journey of what would become an American legend, the Pony Express. As Fry's horse thundered across the frontier landscape, he embodied the beginning of a revolutionary communication system. After racing across punishing terrain, he transferred his leather mochila filled with letters to the next waiting rider, who continued the relay. Like a swift-moving human chain stretching across the untamed American wilderness, rider after rider pushed forward through harsh conditions and dangerous territories. When those letters finally reached California soil just 9 days and 23 hours later, they had traversed an astonishing 2,000 miles of mountains, deserts, and plains. Never before had messages crossed the continent with such remarkable speed, a feat that transformed how Americans understood distance and communication. Johnny Fry wasn't chosen by chance for this historic first ride. Despite his youthful appearance and weighing scarcely 125 pounds, the Missouri native possessed a spirit that defied his compact frame. The strenuous 80-mile ride from St. Joseph to Seneca, Kansas, was his designated route, and it called for exceptional endurance and horsemanship. Fry conquered this segment at a breathtaking pace of 12.5 miles per hour, including all necessary stops to exchange horses. When Civil War erupted across the nation, Fry's adventurous spirit led him to enlist with Union forces under General James Blunt. His remarkable life story came to a heroic but tragic conclusion in 1863, during a fierce encounter with Confederate guerrillas in southeastern Kansas. Even in his final moments, Fry's legendary courage shone through. Reports claim he single-handedly overcame 5 enemy combatants before falling in battle. As the pioneer of an enterprise that forever altered America's perception of speed, communication, and the conquerable vastness of the frontier, Johnny Fry's legacy persists despite the shortness of his life. The Pony Express operated with around 153 stations spread along its long route. These stops gave riders a chance to rest, swap out tired horses, and hand off the mail to the next rider in the relay. In total, about 80 riders took part in this ambitious mail delivery system, supported by a fleet of 400 to 500 horses. Each rider typically covered 75 to 100 miles during their shift, changing horses every 10 to 15 miles at the designated stations. Fresh horses were kept ready and waiting, allowing the mail to keep moving at top speed. Some of the stations were comfortable outposts, even hotels, while others were just basic wooden shacks in the middle of nowhere. Riders of the Pony Express had to put up with difficult terrain and unpredictable weather. Their route took them across mountain ranges and scorching deserts, where they sometimes had to ride through tornadoes and even herds of stampeding buffalo. But one of the most dangerous moments in Pony Express history came in May 1860, during the outbreak of the Pyramid Lake War. This conflict started when a wave of white settlers flooded into Nevada in search of silver. The Paiute people, native to the area, saw this as a direct threat to their lands and way of life, and chose to resist. In the fighting that followed, several Pony Express stations were attacked and destroyed. While some riders were killed while carrying mail, it was often the station keepers, the men who managed the stops, who faced the worst of the violence. Many of them lost their lives during these brutal raids. Among the rugged souls who carried America's mail across the wilderness was a young Virginian known professionally as Jim Beatley, though he was born with the surname Foote. At just 25 years old, this Eastern Division courier typically thundered westward from Seneca, Kansas, carrying precious correspondence toward distant outposts. Beatley's endurance became legendary in Postal Service circles when he accomplished an extraordinary feat, covering the demanding 50-mile stretch between Seneca, Kansas, and Big Sandy, Nebraska, not once but twice in each direction during a single week. This remarkable display of stamina underscored the exceptional physical demands placed upon these frontier messengers. Tragically, Beatley's promising life met an abrupt end in 1862, not from the countless dangers of the trail, but during a personal dispute with a stagehand on a southern Nebraska ranch. Like many fleeting frontier legends, his remarkable service was cut short by the volatile nature of life in America's expanding territories. While many Pony Express couriers were barely more than teenagers, William Bolton brought maturity to the saddle at approximately 35 years of age. For 3 months he rode alongside Jim Beatley, facing the same punishing conditions and relentless schedules. Bolton's unwavering dedication to the mail service manifested dramatically during one harrowing journey between Seneca and Guittard Station in Kansas. 5 miles short of his destination, disaster struck. His exhausted horse could continue no further. Where others might have waited for assistance, Bolton instantly dismounted, secured the irreplaceable mail pouch, and completed the remaining distance on foot through challenging terrain. Upon reaching Guittard's station breathless but determined, he immediately mounted a fresh horse and resumed his route without missing a beat. Such commitment to the mail must go through ethos exemplified the extraordinary character of these postal pioneers. Mel Bond patrolled the crucial corridor between Fort Kearny, Nebraska, and 32 Mile Creek. During a rare rest period between his grueling rides, Bond discovered a brazen thief had absconded with his favorite horse, a companion as valuable as it was irreplaceable on the frontier. Refusing to accept this loss, Bond immediately saddled an inferior replacement horse and launched into pursuit. Despite the thief's advantage of riding Bond's superior mount, Mel's exceptional horsemanship gradually closed the gap across miles of open country. As they approached Loup Fork, the overwhelmed horse thief abandoned his stolen prize and vanished into the wilderness. After recovering his valued steed, Bond calmly returned to his station to discover a mail bag awaiting delivery. Without complaint or delay, he immediately departed on his scheduled run, treating the entire horse theft episode as merely an inconvenient disruption to his postal duties. Although Bond's life would later end controversially at the gallows in Seneca, Kansas for an unrelated murder charge, his dedicated service to the Pony Express remained impeccable throughout his tenure. For these remarkable men, extraordinary acts of courage and perseverance were simply considered part of the job, unremarkable necessities in their dangerous profession of connecting a growing nation through its most challenging landscapes. Among the Eastern Division's elite couriers stood Jack Keatley, who alternated routes with Johnny Fry and Mel Bond along the vital corridor between St. Joseph, Missouri, and Seneca, Kansas. Though every Pony Express rider showed incredible grit, Keatley's feat ranks among the most legendary of them all. In a near-superhuman act of endurance, he rode from Rock Creek Station in Nebraska all the way to St. Joseph, Missouri, then turned right around, headed back to Rock Creek, pressed on to Seneca, and finally made his way home once more to Rock Creek Station. This mind-boggling circuit covered 340 miles without a moment's rest. For 31 consecutive hours, Keatley maintained an average pace of 11 miles per hour across varying terrain and conditions. As his extraordinary marathon neared completion, exhaustion finally overtook even his iron will. During the final 5 miles, Keatley drifted into unconsciousness while still in the saddle, his body continuing to move in rhythm with his horse as he completed his unprecedented journey in a state of sleep. Born in 1844 in the aptly named Painted Post, Steuben County, New York, Don C. Rising ventured westward at just 13 years of age, embodying the pioneering spirit that would later define his postal service. Rising joined the Pony Express in November 1860 and served until the line's discontinuation the following October, remarkably completing most of his dangerous assignments before his 17th birthday. Rising primarily galloped eastward from Fort Kearny, Nebraska, continuing these vital runs until advancing telegraph lines eventually rendered this portion of the express route obsolete. What distinguished this youthful rider was his extraordinary velocity. On 2 separate occasions, Rising reportedly maintained the blistering pace of 20 miles per hour while carrying critical dispatches between Big Sandy and Rock Creek Station in Nebraska. This remarkable speed, especially sustained over significant distances, showcased both exceptional horsemanship and the elite caliber of steed selected for the service. Following his adventure-filled youth, Rising eventually settled in northern Kansas, carrying stories of the frontier mail service into the next generation. Not every hero of the saddle made a significant historical impact. One rider, known simply as Little Yank, became renowned despite minimal documentation of his life beyond the mail route. This small courier, barely out of his teens and weighing only 100 pounds, was perfect for the service's weight constraints as he patrolled the treacherous Platte River section between Cottonwood Springs, Nebraska, and historic Julesburg, Colorado. Despite his slight frame, Little Yank regularly completed grueling 100-mile circuits on single trips, demonstrating that physical endurance on the frontier mail line had little correlation with size. Similarly enigmatic was a rider named Hogan, who traversed the northwesterly route from Julesburg, Colorado, crossing the formidable Platte River to reach Mud Springs approximately 80 miles distant. Though historical records preserve little of his personal story, his reliable service across this challenging terrain speaks to the quiet dedication that characterized many unsung heroes of the Express. Meanwhile, Jimmy Clark shuttled vital correspondence between various stations east of Fort Kearny, typically connecting Big Sandy, Nebraska with Hollenberg, Kansas. Occasionally, Clark's assignments extended westward to Liberty Farm along the Little Blue River, requiring adaptability to changing conditions and routes that typified the flexible nature of these frontier postal carriers. When James W. Brink joined the Pony Express service in April 1860, few could have predicted that history would remember him more for his gunfighting than his mail carrying. Known as Doc among his fellow riders, Brink established himself as a reliable courier, galloping through dangerous territory with precious correspondence. However, his name would become etched in frontier lore through bloodshed rather than horsemanship. At Rock Creek Station, a confrontation erupted that would become legendary in Western chronicles. Alongside the soon-to-be infamous Wild Bill Hickok, Brink found himself facing down the notorious McCannell's Gang, a band of outlaws terrorizing the region. In a violent clash that exemplified the raw justice of the frontier, Brink and Hickok stood their ground and, as contemporaries bluntly phrased it, cleaned out the criminal band, leaving 5 outlaws dead when the gunsmoke cleared. While Brink continued his postal duties afterward, this deadly encounter overshadowed his contributions to the nation's communication network, demonstrating how quickly Pony Express men could transform from messengers to fighters when circumstances demanded. Entrusting an 80-mile mail route to a 17-year-old might seem reckless by modern standards, but Charles Cliff proved equal to the demanding task. Like Brink, however, Cliff's most harrowing moments came not while carrying mail pouches, but during a separate frontier incident that revealed his extraordinary courage. While working as a freighter leading a modest train of 9 wagons across the plains, Cliff and his companions suddenly found themselves surrounded by approximately 100 Sioux warriors. What followed was a 3-day siege of relentless attacks, with the vastly outnumbered freighters fighting desperately for survival. Only when a larger wagon train appeared on the horizon did the Sioux finally withdraw. The brutal encounter left Cliff with 3 bullets lodged in his body and 27 more holes through his clothing, a testament to both the ferocity of the attack and his miraculous survival. Remarkably, Cliff recovered from these grievous wounds and returned to the Pony Express service without hesitation, carrying the mail with the same dedication as before, now adorned with scars that silently testified to frontier dangers. Few Pony Express employees could claim the distinction of helping establish the actual route, but J.G. Kelly, who later settled in Denver, stood among this elite group. Working alongside Superintendent Roberts from the company's inception, Kelly helped map and construct the crucial passage across Nevada's challenging terrain. The Carson River section presented particular difficulties, requiring extensive stretches of corduroy road, a primitive highway built from logs laid side by side. Kelly recounted how workers cut willow trees near the river bank and prepared the trunks before carrying them, often for 300 yards, through swarms of mosquitoes so dense they obscured the men's faces and hands beneath a living, biting shroud. More challenges awaited at the sink of the Carson, a vast depression where the river disappeared into Nevada's unforgiving desert. Here, Kelly helped construct a defensive fort against indigenous attacks. But the absence of timber or stone forced the men to build using adobe mud. The alkali-saturated soil required extensive trampling to reach proper consistency, a task the men performed barefoot for entire days. Kelly grimly recalled how their feet swelled to the size and shape of hams from the caustic minerals. Yet another sacrifice demanded by the frontier mail service. Kelly's frontier experiences grew even more perilous when he was appointed assistant station keeper at Cold Springs, 32 miles east of Sand Springs. The entire postal route was in danger due to an ongoing Paiute rebellion, and this isolated outpost was one of 3 forts Kelly helped build in Nevada. One night while standing guard, Kelly noticed the station's horses growing increasingly restless, often the first warning of danger in the wilderness. Peering carefully through the darkness, he discerned the silhouette of a Paiute warrior attempting to scale the station's protective stockade wall. Following the station's strict defensive protocols, Kelly fired immediately, though his shot missed its mark. The following morning, numerous footprints discovered around the perimeter confirmed what Kelly had suspected. A significant raiding party had surrounded the station. His timely shot, though inaccurate, had likely deterred what would have been a devastating attack on the isolated outpost and its small contingent of defenders. That morning, a fatally wounded Mexican pony rider arrived at the station after being ambushed by Indians while riding through quaking Asp Bottom's dense thicket. Despite receiving care, he died within hours. With mail waiting for delivery, Kelly, weighing only 100 pounds and the lightest man available, was ordered to take the deceased rider's place. He completed the initial run without incident. Kelly had to make his way back through the same treacherous aspen grove where his predecessor had been slain. This treacherous 2-mile stretch limited visibility to just 30 to 40 feet ahead. Anticipating trouble, Kelly raced through with his repeating rifle ready. After clearing the thicket, he stopped on a hilltop and noticed suspicious movement in the bushes behind him. He fired several shots toward the rustling vegetation, which then ceased, allowing him to continue safely. Days later, 2 U.S. soldiers were ambushed and killed in that same location while traveling to their command. This occurred around the time of Major Ormsby's defeat at the First Battle of Pyramid Lake, when Nevada's indigenous peoples were particularly emboldened and dangerous. The small station typically housed only 3 or 4 men, making Kelly and his companions' survival remarkable. Another challenging route for Kelly was the 37-mile waterless stretch between Cold Springs and Sand Springs. Once, passing an immigrant wagon train, Kelly barely escaped a volley of bullets. Unable to stop, he confronted the same group on his return journey, expressing his outrage in colorful language. They merely insisted, "We thought you was an Indian." This wasn't unique. Many pony riders faced similar dangers from settlers. Sun-darkened and riding swiftly, these riders could easily be mistaken for indigenous scouts. Settlers were particularly wary of lone riders who might be attempting to draw their fire before a larger attack. The frontier rule was simple: shoot first and ask questions later. Beyond the inherent hazards of wilderness, scorching deserts, fierce blizzards, and hostile indigenous warriors, pony riders occasionally faced unexpected danger from fellow settlers. This additional threat further intensified the dramatic tension of their already perilous lives. These riders didn't shy away from risk. Rather, they embraced it, rarely finding themselves without some form of danger close at hand. Richard Egan wasn't just a mailman, he was a frontier daredevil in the saddle. As one of only 80 riders chosen for the legendary Pony Express, Egan carried letters and news across the dangerous frontier when communication could mean life or death. While most workers earned pennies a day, Egan's daring job paid $100 to $125 monthly, serious money in the 1860s that reflected just how important and dangerous his work was. A lone rider racing across open country, carrying the nation's secrets and family letters in his saddlebags, knowing that bandits, wolves, storms, and hostile tribes might be waiting around any bend. Another rider, Billy Fisher, wasn't just riding mail, he was riding history. One of the very first men hired by the Pony Express in 1860, Fisher faced the untamed frontier with grit and courage. Born in England but forged on American soil, he galloped through desolate plains and rough country, where danger could strike at any mile. Like his fellow riders, Fisher risked everything to keep the country united, earning his money not only with speed, but also with sheer bravery. When the Pony Express ended, he didn't slow down. He traded his saddle for a homestead, becoming a rancher in Idaho. Through blistering heat, punishing cold, hostile territories, and exhausting distances, these remarkable messengers connected a growing nation through sheer determination and exceptional skill, their stories forming an indelible chapter in America's communication history.